first black regiment to be raised in the North. There had already been some raised in the South, but they were comprised mostly of freed slaves. And again, if you've seen the movie, they lead you to believe that the Massachusetts regiment was comprised mostly of freed slaves as well, which was not the case. They were actually, almost none of them had ever spent a day in slavery, so it was the total opposite. And in fact, the literacy rate of the 54th was higher than that of the average white regiment. So they were all very smart men. And since it was the first regiment to be raised in the North, even though they were called the Massachusetts Regiment, yes, a majority of them were from Massachusetts, but they actually recruited from all over the North, and even they recruited some troops from Canada to fill the 1,000-man quota for the regiment. And they became well known, and the reason they're significant is because their actions and what they accomplished allowed the formation of other black regiments, and by the end of the war, over 150,000 African-American troops would serve for the Union, and Lincoln would even say that if it wasn't for those soldiers, the Union would not have won the war. And it was because of Shaw and the 54th that allowed for all of those men to come along after them and fight for the Union. Now, when Saint-Gaudens was originally commissioned to do this piece, the commission called for it to be done in 2 years. And it took him 14 years to finish it. Now, if you've been with me for my tour, you know I've mentioned that he's a perfectionist, and that sure shined through on this piece. Initially, the initial delays were caused because he had this vision of Shaw on a horse. It's kind of considered a rite of passage for a sculptor to do a man on a horse, and he figured this would be his perfect opportunity to do the man on the horse. However, Shaw's parents were still alive, and when they found out that Saint-Gaudens had put just Shaw on a horse, they said, no way, because doing a man on a horse, that's considered the highest honor for people of the highest rank, for generals, for presidents. And even though what he did represented something great, they didn't feel it was fitting to have their son on a horse because he was only a colonel. And it's considered like it was a great honor to have the sculpture of yourself done on a horse. So, however, Saint-Gaudens had this image of Shaw on a horse stuck in his head, and he just couldn't let it go. So that he had to kind of come up with something to keep him on the horse, and that was when he realized he had to bring in the troops of the 54th around him, because that would divert the attention away from Shaw on the horse, and it actually would make them the focus of the piece. Now, for the men, he did 40 case studies, and if you were member in the atrium, you might have seen some of them. Those are the only surviving case studies that we have, those 6 heads in the case. There were originally 40, and of the 40, he only used 18 in the actual piece. Now, for the detail, you see in each row there's 4 men, and every man has just as much detail as the one in front of him. And there's even 2 rows of men behind the horse that you can't see. And even though you can't see them, they're all full detail, every one of them. He did not let anything go. And what happened was in the committee who commissioned Saint-Gaudens to do the piece, after the 2-year limit was up, they started writing them letters. We have correspondence. And the general gist of the letters goes something like this. They'd write them and they'd say, oh, how's it going? It's been, it's past your deadline. What's going on? Is it almost done? And he'd write back and say, oh, I just got to finish one more thing and it'll be there. 3 years later, oh, how's it going? You said to do one more thing. Are you almost done? Right back, one more thing. I'm almost there. I'm almost there. I'm almost done. And 3 more years, and so on and so forth. And what happened was members of the committee actually started to pass away. So you can't say that he was rushed because it took him 7 times as long as it was supposed to. But when the piece was unveiled in Boston in 1897, it was considered an instant success. It was almost like an instant masterpiece. Everybody recognized the talent that went into it, the skill level. It was instant success, except to him. He was not happy with the piece in Boston. So after the ceremony, he came back, and he had the mold for that one demolished because he never wanted it recreated ever again. That's how unhappy he was with it. So even though technically the commission was done and he had fulfilled his obligation to the committee, he continued to work on the piece for 3 more years of his own time and his own money until he came up with what he felt was the final perfected version. And that's what we have here today. This is what he would have considered the final version of the Shaw Memorial.
Do you know how this differs from the original?
It is, and that's how I was going to say. That's how you'll be able to tell the difference which one they might have used in the movie. The face and the hand of the angel are slightly altered, so that might not be as obvious if you watch the movie. The face is pointing more outwards, like looking at us. The flags are more wavy because he felt they're recreating a scene here. It's basically a snapshot in sculpture, or photograph in sculpture. They're recreating the day that the 54th marched off to battle for Boston Common. So they would have been moving, and he felt that, again, the illusion of movement didn't really show itself, so he made the flags more wavy. And then the tail and the mane of the horse, he also made more wavy because the one in Boston, they just kind of sit there, as if the horse is just standing, not moving. So he made those more wavy. And the one where you'll probably really be able to tell is the inscription along the bottom. That is not on the one in Boston. So really, just look for the inscription in the movie, and that'll tell you if they used this version or the one in Boston. So if there's no inscription, then somehow they did the lighting right in Boston. But I want to say they did use the one in Washington, D.C. though.
I've got the movie, so I'll watch it.
I'm sorry?
The one in D.C. is identical
to this one. It's the plaster mold of this one. So as I mentioned, he had the mold. He never wanted the one in Boston ever recreated again. Yeah. And I mentioned his attention to detail. The date on the bottom, the date of the battle where they fought and they really made a name for themselves. It was at Fort Wagner. He wrote that it took place on July 23rd. It really took place on July 18th. He put the wrong date. And you had to be sure someone would have pointed this out to him, but for whatever reason, he left it as the 23rd, so that's what we have, that's what we see today. So any questions about the Shaw before we move on to